when they come into firms, they're incredibly eager, but often not with a full understanding of how to build those relationships, how to communicate. Well, we're talking about communicating, how to position themselves well, and even fully understand what is expected of them. And that's the space that I'm interested in helping them understand what's expected. I think we can do a better job of explaining that. So from your experience, seeing multiple systems across Brazil, the US, and Canada, are there any themes that have come up for you and what new lawyers need to know that's not taught in law schools?
Absolutely. So I think that one of the big things that I've found over and over again and that I kind of reduced to a phrase is that in law, in legal careers specifically, communication matters much more than your credentials. So you could be, having the bar of New York, Ontario, California, UK all together and still not be a great communicator. And that might not open as many doors for you. And that's not only about, getting a job, but it's actually once you get into the workplace, there's so many things that this big box called communication involve. It has to do with the way you portray yourself, the way you tell your story, the way you reach out to say, hey, I have capacity. Can I help with anything? But
Yes.
also the way you show up at work. And when you were there in person at 4 p.m. and you see a partner kind of wandering around and you kind of volunteer yourself, you talk over, with them, or you go to get some water and you chat with people around you. So there's so many ways that communication can be present in the day-to-day work.
Today, I get to talk to Claudio Klaus, who is a Brazilian trained lawyer, now articling in Ontario. And he has experience across Brazil, the US, and Canada in corporate and commercial real estate law. And he hosts a global legal podcast with over 120 episodes on legal careers worldwide. Beyond that, Claudio led a 75 lawyer interview project for the University of Toronto Faculty of Law's 75th anniversary, focused on advice for early career lawyers from alumni, later published as a booklet. Welcome to the Lawyer Launcher Podcast. Hello, friends. I'm your host, Susan Van Dyke. If you're a law student or a new lawyer eager to launch a successful career, you're in the right place. Drawing on more than 25 years of experience, I'll demystify the business of law and help you understand just what it takes to succeed. We'll empower you, help build confidence, and reduce anxiety. Our experts will share tips and advice, and I can't wait for you to hear from them. Now, let's dive in. Claudio, welcome. Thank you so much for joining me.
I appreciate it. I'm very happy to be here. Excited for our conversation.
I am as well. Now, I first came upon you when you were meeting with 75 grads on this journey. It must have been a couple of years ago. Have I got that right?
Yes, it actually just completed a year since I finished the project. So I started in 2024 and finished it up in 2025.
So it must have been in 2024. I saw you. I don't know if it was on LinkedIn or where it was. I thought that is the coolest thing. And now I get to talk to you. So I'm super lit up about chatting with you and learning all about kind of behind the scenes and what inspired you to start that podcast. Or that project, rather. I guess it wasn't a podcast, really, was it? It was an interview that you later made into a booklet. So tell me what started the inspiration for that 75 interview or networking goal? Tell us about it.
Absolutely. So there were a few things going on in my mind at the same time, right? So I was starting my Master's of Laws at the University of Toronto, and I had been somewhat active on LinkedIn for a couple of years now. And something that I had noticed with quite a few of the American JD students that I had connected over the years is that there was some kind of a challenge for you to meet with 100 lawyers over your 3 years of law school. So people would recommend doing that so that you'd have a better idea of what you want to do, what kind of law, all these choices would really be more based on these conversations than just on the subject matter you studied at school. Because we could all agree that, you can really like your contracts class or your constitutional law class, but once you start actually practicing something, that area of law might look very different. So I had learned about that experience, and I was semi-active on LinkedIn. So all of these things were kind of cooking together. I also knew that the University of Toronto, specifically the Faculty of Law, had an incredible alumni base, and many of them were very willing to chat. So I was trying to see, how I could, make a really interesting learning experience, how I could tap into that alumni network, but also how I could make something interesting to celebrate the university's anniversary. So it was the 75th anniversary. I thought it was quite, an important year and an exciting one to be a student there. So I thought I would kind of put all of these things together, and I ended up, interviewing 75 of the Faculty of Law's alumni to ask them, what kind of advice would you give to the next generation of lawyer for the next 75 years of both the school and that is upcoming?
Is there one single greatest learning from talking to 75 alumni from the University of Toronto?
Yeah, so I definitely learned a lot of things, but I think that two main topics definitely kept showing up again and again. And I think that one of them is that maximum that there's no single way to have a legal career. There's no single path to success. So I talked with people who were, um, on the bench, right, as judges. I talked with people who were working in another country. I talked with people with you can imagine how many different areas, from corporate practice to solo to working in a not-for-profit. So very, very many different kinds of lawyers. And they all basically said something similar. They were like, when I started my career, I had no idea this is where I was going to land. I just really stayed, open to the possibilities. And it just, things kept on happening and I kept pursuing my interests and I got to where I am. And I think that that was one of the main points. And then number two was definitely many of the lawyers would say again and again, networking. Keep on networking throughout your career. Don't stop, meeting with your colleagues from law school. Don't stop keeping in touch with people that you've met throughout your professional life. They, sometimes will bring you clients, but sometimes they would just be a sounding board and someone that you can, go to when you find a professional dilemma or when you want to be introduced to someone who could be either a client or, somebody who could open the doors for another professional opportunity. So I think that those are the two things that repeated over and over again, and that I definitely, am trying my best to keep in mind as I move forward.
I love that. And that makes a lot of sense. And, with the networking, you just never know where it's going to take you. You can never presuppose where it's going to take you. People are so interesting and people themselves end up in interesting dynamic environments that, might intersect with where you are 5 years from now. You just never know. I want to come back to networking because I think that's a really important topic, especially for the students listening and the audience that I have. I think that's something that it can be challenging for a lot of people. Let me come back to that, though. And I want to just pivot for a second and talk to you a little bit about a decision that you made to move jurisdictions, which sounds exciting on one level, but I imagine it was incredibly difficult on another level. And you've done it a couple of times. And I wanted to ask you, was there a moment when you thought this is going to be harder than I expected?
It's always interesting. I feel like when you are on one side of a problem, you always have a hard time, imagining the magnitude of it. Sometimes you are too close to the problem that you see it too big. Sometimes you're too far away and you
Yes.
underestimate it. So
Mhm.
I think that there was definitely different phases through navigating it. And now that I'm basically on the other side, I'm almost done with my articling and ready to be called to the bar in Ontario, with bar exams all cleared
Congratulations.
already.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah.
It's definitely a time to kind of look back and see and understand all that happened in this period, right? It's such an intense period that I just went through, basically doing a master's, writing the bar exams, doing articling, all of that somewhat at the same time. So it was quite intense, and um, I think there were moments that I thought, well, this is just taking a lot of time, and honestly, it was a process of about 2 years, so it's not even that long. But when you're living through it, right, it just feels like it's taking just so long. And then at times, I would have the positive attitude of thinking, man, I'm going to probably be, healthy and well and working until I'm 80 years old. So, 2 years is not a big deal. So it definitely, I went through waves of being very excited with the process and waves of being maybe a little bit discouraged and, tired of, either studying for the bar exams or just having long hours that day. But it was just all like part of the process. And happily I was because of all these conversations and the connection, I was pretty well informed of what was going to happen, what were the next steps that I was going to have afterwards. So I wasn't, in a way, like blindsided by any of the steps that I would have to do. So I think that that helped me a lot in the sense that I had all the information. I knew what would happen. I had kind of like a clear timeline
Well,
of you do this, then you
you
do
had an
that.
intended path, didn't you?
That is correct.
So
Yes.
take us through.
Yes.
You started in Brazil. You were born and raised in Brazil,
That is
right?
right. Yes.
And then from there, take us through quickly your journey,
Of course.
if you don't
Yes.
mind.
So, oh yeah, not at
Yeah.
all. Not at all. So I'll try to make it short here. So basically, studied in Brazil, worked there and just in about high school, my second year of high school, I had the opportunity to in Brazil, you could do like a trade during high school. So I did IT during my second year of high school, and it was more related to software, to hardware, to actually the pieces of the computer, putting it together. Because I had done that on my third year of high school, my mom worked at the real estate registry office or the land registry office, like we have across Canada as well. And the head of that land registry office needed somebody to do some IT work, to move some computers around and all of that. And I had the chance to go and work at the land registry office. It so happened that a lot of the people working there were lawyers. So they definitely influenced me to keep on studying law. I wasn't quite sure. I actually had considered environmental engineering as one of the undergrads that I wanted to take because I had a cousin and that I really admired, and that's what she studied. But I ended up choosing law school, and in Brazil, law school is a bachelor's degree. So, with all of that in context, I have the opportunity to go to the US for 2 years for volunteer work. I go to Arizona, I spend this awesome time, come back home, speak much better English at this point, and I want to have a very international career. So I go back to law school that I had started, talk to the Dean of Law, and I ask, how can I make my career as international as possible? And she tells me, oh, you should probably change professions. If you want to do anything international, don't stick with law. And it was the best information she had at the time, and the world is constantly changing and being more connected, and opportunities for lawyers are showing up more and more. But I was quite, let down by that,
Mm-hmm.
by what she said. So I ended up going home. My parents were like, "Okay, you can't drop out of law school," but I found out that I could actually add another subject of study to my studies. So I started doing an undergrad in international relations at the same time. So I would take both courses, and with all of that happening at the same time, COVID showed up and the world shut, and all that happened. But it gave me the opportunity to connect with a lot of lawyers online, a lot of lawyers who had careers that were interesting to me that spanned through different countries. And that's how I started my podcast. So it gave me a lot of inspiration on international careers being possible. During this time, lots of opportunities to interact with different universities and all of that. Basically, all of these things kept happening, and I had the chance to work with a judge in the US in 2022. And then by the end of 2022, I came to Canada as a researcher. I was researching specifically regulated fields, specifically on water and sanitation. So I was at Osgoode Hall at York University here in Toronto, and that's the time where I met the person who's now my wife. So I hadn't planned to move careers to Canada specifically, but I ended up coming here to study and left Canada, with a relationship. I was there clerking for a judge, so my wife joined me in Brazil, so we lived there together for a year and then decided to come back to Canada and continue my legal career here.
Sorry, I'm going to interrupt really quickly. Don't forget to subscribe. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button. And while you're at it, why don't you shoot this episode to somebody who could use it? Just send it off. Send it off to 2 or 3 people. Let them know that you're thinking of them and you thought of them as you were listening to this episode, because something in here is relevant for them. And you're going to do them a huge favor by sharing this episode with them. So while you're thinking of it right now, while I'm interrupting this episode, shoot them that share button and get it into somebody else's hands so they get the help that they need as well. Thank you. What's interesting about, I mean, there's so many interesting pieces about your story, is that you were intentional from quite an early stage that you wanted to have this international experience. That's what kind of rises to the surface for me. That's quite interesting. Where did that come from?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't know if I can pinpoint it exactly. I don't know if it were, the movies when I grew up, what specifically made me really want to do something international, but it was really a desire that I had from early on. And then, studying English, seeing all the possibilities that could happen for your career, for your life. I just really knew that, the world was a lot bigger than my city.
But Claudio, you went from Brazil to, was it Arizona, to Toronto, met your wife, all the way back to Brazil, learning languages, well, learning English along the way, and then 2 degrees. I mean, it's not for the faint of heart, your journey, that's for sure.
It was a fun one. It was a fun one. And of course I gave you kind of the summarized version here because we
Yes.
could probably spend a whole
Yes.
hour with me telling you all the details.
Yes. Yes. And so now this spring you're articling now and you are called to the bar this spring.
That is correct.
Yeah.
Yes. So just in the
Congratulations.
summer, in June, that's when
Yeah.
I'll be called to the bar officially.
Yeah. Congratulations. What a journey. So if somebody was sitting in law school right now thinking, I have to follow a very specific path, and I'm on this path and it's been carved out for me, and I guess I'm just going to go on this path, what would you say to them?
Yeah, I think I have this advantage of having, the compound knowledge of lots of people that I interviewed in my podcast and also in this U of T law project. And then my personal experience as well, right? So drawing from both of these experiences together, I would say that, you know, sure, go with the path, see if it makes you happy, reevaluate it, see if if it aligns well with your values. And if that makes sense to you, if it's making you happy, if it aligns with your values, that's perfect. Keep on keeping on.
Mm-hmm.
If at any point you realize that it doesn't align anymore with the person you want to be, with your values, with what you aspire for your life, you can, start preparing a transition. And it's incredible what you can do with a law degree. There's so much that can be done. And, keep on building your network, keep on, working hard and really developing those skills that you can where you are and
Mm-hmm.
prepare for
Mm-hmm.
that transition.
You made an interesting comment earlier about, I'm currently in this time right now. It's only going to be a couple more years. And yes, it's hard. Yes, I'm working through it and I'm tired and it's been quite a journey, but I plan to practice until I'm 80. So this is just 2 years out of my career's lifespan. And I think that's a really interesting perspective, Claudio, because I mean, I worked with a fellow who worked into his 80s, and this is 30 years ago. He worked into his 80s, and I think his family, eventually forced him to retire. I've worked with others that are well into their late 70s. It doesn't seem abnormal anymore, and as long as people can choose. So I love the point of you get to choose the path that you're on, and don't be afraid to take risks. right? Don't feel too rigid. And because you can always realign yourself on a new path if it's not fulfilling you anymore, right?
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. At any step of your career, there is the opportunity to move around. You're never kind of bound by your choices, and it's quite interesting. At points you might think, oh, there's all this sunk cost. I spent so much time learning or studying these, but really most skills are very transferable. So
Mhm.
even if you don't want to continue in a legal role, if you want to go, in a marketing role or, in a talent role, there's always a lot of skills that you can transfer from the legal field. So there's definitely a lot of things to learn, and it might be a steep, learning curve, but
Mhm.
absolutely there is, a lot that you can draw from your legal career if you ever
Yes.
plan to move away.
And even within the legal field, I mean, of course, there's so many fields you can take a law degree, but within the legal field, aside from practicing law, there's a lot of lawyers that are doing all kinds of different things. They're working, as you said, in marketing, business development. They're also certainly working in talent and professional development. That's an excellent space for a lawyer, and many other areas. So, it really is open to what you want to make your career look like. So I want to we were talking about networking earlier, and I want to you, Claudio, are so exceptionally good at networking and building relationships, and I've seen it just in our interactions prior to this podcast. You clearly see it on LinkedIn, you clearly see it in your podcasts, and how you draw people out, and you're such a great communicator, and good communication skills is part of what networking is, certainly. And this is so critically important for junior lawyers, the networking skills and communication skills, of course. But most people, and you kind of touched on it earlier, but most new lawyers or law students, they wait too long to start networking. I get the sense that they feel like a switch has to go off and they need to get permission, or maybe they have imposter syndrome, or they're waiting for the recruitment season to start, or feel like they have sufficient time to start networking. You didn't do any of those things. You just got on with it. You seem to just naturally, even with English as a second language, even though you maybe you were more proficient at the time, not such a new English language speaker, but you just got on with it. Tell us, did that take courage? Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think there was a lot to be considered, right? So I would definitely say that I first needed to know more information. I definitely wanted to understand better the possibilities and career outcomes. So I think that all of those things together motivated me a lot. When I talk with my peers, with some of the law students that studied with me, that they don't either personally like networking or their work environment, they feel like it's not really seen as positive. If you're talking to other lawyers, it might give the bad impression that you're maybe, trying to find another job, or, there's kind of like a bad stigma in the workplace that they are placed in. So it really depends on where you are and what kinds of incentives you would have to do that. Um, I feel very fortunate to have this podcast project now for over 5 years, because carrying this over from law school doesn't carry any of these bad baggage. So I feel like if even if I go to, a firm that doesn't maybe see as much of the value as talking to, fellow people in the profession, which I find that very unlikely. I do have, a personally good reason to do that, a perfectly reasonable reason to continue on talking with lawyers. But I really, more and more, I see a profession that is united in many ways, that does, have this desire to pay forward. So it's so common for lawyers to, even in their busy schedules, to schedule coffee chats, virtual coffee
Yes,
chats,
yes.
lunches with other law students, especially in this first years of the profession. So I see a lot of a very big sense of wanting to pay back all of the generosity that they were offered and
Yes.
afforded when they were in that position. And
Yes.
especially when you're reaching out to, fellow articling students, first, second, even third year associates that, very recently went through the recruitment process and still kind of remember the feeling. I really find very, welcoming messages from those that are navigating, just a few steps ahead.
I think that's so true. And that's been my experience as well. Lawyers are so very generous and they mean to be generous. And I think if ever a student were to reach out to somebody and they weren't granted time, probably it's a matter of, they were just too busy in that moment and to try again. But I really believe, truly 95% of the lawyers that I know mean to be generous and would like to give the gift of time to a student or a junior, but it's just a matter of timing. And I really believe that to be true. So was there ever a point where you felt uncomfortable reaching out to people or putting yourself out there? Did you, I talked about imposter syndrome earlier. Did you ever have imposter syndrome?
Yeah, I will be quite honest, in all of these interactions, I feel like there's always people that you automatically match with or people that you really, have a good connection that you somehow automatically feel good about talking to them. It certainly has happened more than once where I went to talk with someone and they I don't know if it was their body language or maybe just the way I felt about them, and they didn't mean to make this impression, but they definitely made me feel like I was wasting their time. So, in a way, it made me, be better prepared for future engagements. So I would know how to kind of get out of that weird, uncomfortable situation. But it also made me realize that, there's so many personalities, so many kinds of lawyers and people in this profession. And it's really a gift that I can choose who I want to associate with, right? So it's always nice to know that there's people who have different personalities, they have different styles of communication. And sometimes their style is not, the warm, fuzzy, happy smiles. And that's okay. There's not a problem with that. But you can just, know that those exist so that when we are out in the profession, really practicing law too, I'm sure that will be the case over and over again. So it's, if anything, I felt, more prepared. I have the heads up now that there's all kinds of personalities and I might not always be welcomed with a hello friend on the other side of the line when I'm, acting on a client file here. So I
That's a
think that
great,
that was
yeah.
something that came to mind. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great perspective, Claudio. I think you're turning it very positive, that it's a learning opportunity and that it does open our perspective that there's all kinds of characters in the world and some we're going to connect better with and others maybe not so much, and that that's okay, and that we're not everybody's cup of tea all the time, and that that's okay, right? And it may not be
It
us. We might
really
have just,
is.
again, caught them at a bad time. And not everybody is so verbally communicative, right? Some people, communicate better in other formats. So I appreciate that, and I think, and it's just learning how to get through what you need to get through. If it's a client file, just get what you get to get done. Do what you need to get done, I should say, and move on. So I appreciate that, and I want to bring.
Absolutely. And oh,
Sorry.
sorry. I was just going to say, it's very interesting that those experiences happen. And as a matter of fact, I had offered to a few lawyers in the past to record a podcast so that when these very busy times would come around and they would say, I can't talk to students now, there's too much going on, and 20 students flooded my inbox this week. You could, maybe send that podcast link and say, hi, like here I tell my story. If you have any specific questions about my practice or anything that we didn't cover in this episode,
Yes, that's
ask me
great.
specifically that.
Yes,
Don't misunderstand my, lack of time for lack of interest, but this hopefully will help you for the time being.
yes.
And actually, quite a few lawyers took me up on that because they felt really bad about not being able to get back because it was something that they enjoyed doing. So I was very happy that, some people in the profession felt that way.
I think that's a brilliant idea. It's good for everyone. I think that's fantastic. I love that. I love that so much. And I want to bring this conversation back to something I see regularly in students and new lawyers, and that is when they come into firms, they're incredibly eager, but often not with a full understanding of how to build those relationships, how to communicate. Well, we're talking about communicating, how to position themselves well, and even fully understand what is expected of them. And that's the space that I'm interested in helping them understand what's expected. I think we can do a better job of explaining that. So, from your experience seeing multiple systems across Brazil, the US, and Canada, are there any themes that have come up for you and what new lawyers need to know that's not taught in law schools?
Absolutely. So I think that one of the big things that I've found over and over again and that I kind of reduced to a phrase is that in law, in legal careers specifically, communication matters much more than your credentials. So you could be, having the bar of New York, Ontario, California, UK all together and still not be a great communicator, and that might not open as many doors for you. And that's not only about, getting a job, but it's actually once you get into the workplace, there's so many things that this big box called communication involve. It has to do with the way you portray yourself, the way you tell your story, the way you reach out to say, hey, I have capacity. Can I help with anything? But
Yes.
also the way you show up at work. And when you were there in person at 4 p.m. and you see a partner kind of wandering around and you kind of volunteer yourself, you talk over with Dan, or you go to get some water and you chat with people around you. So there's so many ways that communication can be present in the day-to-day work that really can have all these fancy terms to talk about it, right? So you can talk about mirroring, you can talk about, managing up. There's all this very specific corporate lingo that was developed about how you can do better at work, and they're all related to communication. And I just think that hopefully improving that communication can really help you in your career, not only to advance in your career, but really to be, someone who can clearly communicate. It's definitely something that can help you to enjoy your career better as well. You had just mentioned that sometimes as a profession we can do better in the sense of communicating what others should expect of us, be that clients, be that articling students who are just starting. And sometimes we don't do a good job at telling them what's expected of them, but also on instructing them, on giving, clear instructions of this is what you need to do, this is how you accomplish that. So I think that communication is really a key thing. And it's also something that it doesn't matter where in the world you are, even though communication styles change a little bit, whether you are in, a high context country or in a low context environment, still communication makes a big difference. So I think that it's really one of these very, transferable skills that regardless of what you work with, you're going to need that.
Well, it makes sense. And I think that the common theme in all of that is we are such a human field that is so dependent on interactivity between humans, whether it's lawyer to lawyer, student to lawyer, client to lawyer, et cetera, staff to lawyer, staff to client. I mean, it's so built on the interactivity between humans and clarity of communication. That's what this industry is built on, aside from the technicalities of law and the various, jurisdictions, of course. But you can have success if you're not communicating clearly. And I think perhaps in law school, there's so much emphasis on the technical side that there needs to be more emphasis on the human side, on the interactivity, and all the different communication styles that you've just explained. I think that's really interesting. So, what is something that you've had to learn the hard way that no one taught you in law school? Is there anything that comes to mind?
Yeah, so I think that communication for once is one of those skills that you don't necessarily, know right out of the box that you need to get better at. I was very lucky to start working by having very wise mentors and bosses who had been in the market for long enough, had, seniority, but also they had a really clear communication and a really clear vision for the business they were building. So even at the land registry office, my leader there, he had total clarity of what he wanted to accomplish and how he wanted to do it. and what role each person played in that. So it really, I felt really fortunate to have that experience from the get-go, because then I went to my next work experience and my leader didn't have that same vision. And I definitely missed a little bit of the structure, but at least I had the base to kind of, okay, this is how this is going to work. Even though my leader doesn't give me this specific structure, I know how it has to be done. And I think that it kind of gave me the way to continue building on that. So I think communication is definitely one of those. And then, it flourishes into other things, but also communication related. Like nobody really knows what you do on LinkedIn. So I'm still kind of trying out and seeing what happens. But thought leadership, writing articles, writing blog posts, all of these different ways of putting myself out there, participating in conferences, participating in associations, all of these things, I think people might say they're good to do, but nobody really knows if there is, a, a, a return on that, if really there's a right way or not to do it. And I don't like to think of myself as a very, utilitarian kind of person. So I'm really okay about, attending a conference where there's no precise ROI, if there's no, a specific return on investment, and I need to go to this conference and talk to 50 people. I'm quite okay, going there, seeing what happens. I think there's a lot of things that we might miss if we go to different, human events, human interactions, and we're just kind of have a very high expectation and mentality of I need to go and I need to work the room or I need to do this or that. And it might work for some people, and then maybe some people might be watching this and thinking, well, if you don't have that structure, you really don't get much out of it. And I don't know. It's hard to say. I don't think there's a right or a wrong way to do this, but I do prefer to go about it trying to keep it somewhat natural.
Well, and you're following your own strengths and your own interests, and maybe doing so with a little bit of courage. I don't know, but certainly it takes some work and some effort to do some of those things, those non-billable activities. And I think that, well, what I know for sure is that many of those things you're gonna realize a benefit, whether today, next week, next year, 5 years from now, as you're building your profile and you're putting content out there. And I'm not talking about the podcast, but you're writing your thought leadership and LinkedIn and all of that. You're putting out your thought leadership there, and people get to know you through your expression of your expertise. So that's always a good thing. Whether or not we can actually pin the return on investment on any particular activity, I have yet to see that, unless, there's some metric out there for some activity that exists. But, we just keep consistently building our profiles. That's the way to achieve the kind of practice that you dream of, right? Is to continue to show up, continue to put stuff out into the world, whether it's video, whether it's, your content, whether it's your commentary, presentations. There's so many different ways that you can put yourself out there. And it's a matter of finding what is comfortable for you, or at least the least uncomfortable for some people in some cases, right? But to continue consistently to put, your content out there, I think is so very important because it builds your profile. It's absolutely essential. So I'm not surprised you're doing that. And I think it's excellent if anyone does that, frankly. I think that's really great. Now, this isn't just a Canadian conversation. Of course, you're in Toronto, I'm in Vancouver, and this podcast is reaching people in all parts of the world. Most notably, I think the last stats I looked at, certainly the US, a lot of Australia. We're getting a lot from the UK, some from India. Who am I missing? Somebody's yelling at me right now. I can feel it. There's a few countries out there that are more engaged than others. And what I love about this conversation, Claudio, is what we're talking about applies to all of those countries, right? The communication is kind of one of the themes. Showing up is one of the themes in consistent ways. Do you find yourself, let me back up. One of the things I hear from students and new lawyers is having to find courage, having to work through discomfort of showing up and being, having a profile, or even getting on LinkedIn for some is a stretch. Did you find in any part of your journey you had to find extra courage to do the things that you either thought were the right thing to do or you knew that you needed to do it? Did you have to find courage? Can you talk to us a bit about that?
Right. Yeah. So I think I did have a few different experiences where um, what I was doing was not compatible to the comfort level of the people around me, and then that discouraged me in a way. So I think I had to navigate a few different situations where I was at the workplace. And happily, it's not the case of the firm that I am right now. Happily, I find a lot of support in that. But in the past, I've navigated, workplaces where LinkedIn was kind of the place that you would go if you're looking for a job. So if you're posting on LinkedIn, it basically means you want to get out of here, and it's basically seen as almost like a betrayal activity. Or on the
Um,
other hand, it's also seen as don't you have work to do? Why are you doing that? Like there's nothing to do on your pile of files. So I think there's different incentives in different workplaces. And sometimes, depending on how people's mindset is wired or whatever experience they had in the past, interacting with people who are active on these platforms can form their opinions. I know of many firms where, associates are not encouraged to do it. People don't really do it at all. You rarely see any online presence other than, the firm pressers or the firm website with their bio. So that's one of the things. I also found people that told me actually, they said, well, my LinkedIn is very personal. I treat it more personal. So I don't like to mix it with work as much. So when people add me on LinkedIn on a work related matter, I'll probably, send them to my work email so we can treat it exclusively in my work email setting. So it's just very interesting. The more people you meet, the more different things you you come up to see,
that's so interesting. I've never heard of LinkedIn being referred to as my personal space. That's really interesting. That has never
Right,
come
right.
across my radar ever. And
I
I do
know. I
LinkedIn.
was also very impressed. I'm like, well, that's very
Yeah, yeah.
interesting, because you'd think of like maybe your Instagram or like your personal social media, and I always think of LinkedIn as the professional one, right? But
Yeah, I describe it as the conference room floor. You're walking on the conference room floor, you're shaking hands, you're chatting with people. It's a little bit social, but it's all framed within a work context. And you're maybe dressed down a little bit. You're probably you're dressed business smart. You're not over drinking. You're having chats about work, that kind of thing, right? Maybe seeing a presentation or
Mhm.
two, right? So yes, so and what you were describing earlier was, those that are only focused on the billable work are focused on the short-term gains. And what you're doing and what I love about what you're doing is you're focused on the long-term gains. All those things that you're doing, the networking, the meeting, the conversations, the learning, the communication building, all of that, those are long-term gains. You're going to benefit from all of these things. You're investing now. You talked about ROI, return on investment. All those things you're doing now are going to give you those long-term gains later on. I mean, you're hopefully seeing some gains now as well because you're meeting interesting people and having interesting conversations and enjoying yourself, hopefully. But the gains are still to come. The gains are still to come.
Yeah, I definitely like to think that it's definitely one of the incentives to keep on doing it. But I would say that, just the amount of mentorship, the amount of really useful information and encouraging words that I've gotten so far already make me feel quite, satisfied with all of these different endeavors that I've underwent through the years. So it's been very interesting. I feel like even if nothing else, quote unquote, comes out of it, I'm very, very happy with what's happened already.
So I have one last question, maybe two last questions for you. One is if you were talking to a student right now who was perhaps in their last year of law school, maybe they don't have an articling position or an internship lined up. What would be would you have a piece of advice for them in this stage of the year, in this stage of their life?
Right. Well, it is a time of lots of uncertainty and it can feel definitely daunting, I'm sure, and overwhelming and maybe even, discouraging to see that you got to that point and especially when you're in an environment probably where lots of your colleagues kind of already know what's going to happen in the next year of their lives. But this is specifically drawing from the experience of those that I've talked to, is that, over time, give it a few years, and it feels like the environment kind of levels itself out. So it can feel really, really hard when you're, in the middle undergoing this, but don't worry too much. Don't be overly, negative or concerned. Try to keep on your efforts of meeting people, of doing something that will continue to build your profile for the future, and definitely don't give up. If you're still in law school, you should be visiting the careers office at least
Hmm.
once a week. They will help you to practice for interviews. They'll make sure that your cover letter and resume are looking good to go. And there's specifically here in Canada, there is the regulated recruits across the country. So sometimes if you miss that deadline already, those are only a few of the jobs in the bigger firms, but honestly, there's this invisible job market that you should go ahead and find, and you find that only by talking with people. So it is, networking, it is, continuing to send in your applications, continue to take a look what shows up on LinkedIn or other job boards. The different associations like the Canadian Bar Association have its own job board. So try to make sure you don't get yourself, disconnected from everything. It might be, a good way to go about it. And try to enjoy your last year of law school as well. It might be really hard to focus on so many different things, but try to enjoy that time as well because
Hmm.
it will probably be very much missed in just a few years when you're in the workplace.
And going back to what you said later or earlier, that it's 1 year when you might plan to practice law until you're 60, 70, or 80. It's 1 year, so not to worry about that 1 year. That it will come. The path will show itself, and it will come. So, what's next for the podcast, Claudio? Carry on.
Yeah, I definitely intend to carry on for a bit. I'm not sure if I will, if this is like a 10-year project, but definitely, another year. I'm trying to take it, a year at a time and see how that goes. Happily, I was able to continue it through articling pretty well, but I really counted on the generosity of the lawyers. Oftentimes I was recording this at 8 p.m. and lawyers were just like, "Yes, sure, no problem." And I'm like, please don't enable me to to be
Uh,
doing this late at night, But I've just have been so lucky to find so many generous professionals. So even when I couldn't record during business hours or even this late, they would be like, "Sure, no problem. I put my kids to bed at 7:30. We'll meet at 8 and we'll get it done." So honestly, this last, I don't know, I want to say over 10 episodes were all done, after 8 p.m. and they're just keep going very well. So hopefully I can keep it up, through first year of practice and so forth. But we'll really see how it goes. I'm excited to see where it leads.
wonderful. I'm excited as well. And you are returning the generosity, Claudio. You are exhibiting what you have experienced from others. We are to reveal ourselves. It's 10:30, 11 o'clock at night, almost in Toronto right now as you're doing this interview with me in Vancouver. So I'm very grateful. And this has been such a valuable conversation, not just because of your experience, but the way that you approach your career with intention. And for those listening, if you're thinking about your own path, especially internationally, this is exactly the kind of mindset you need to be paying attention to. We'll link to Claudio's podcast so you can explore more of his work. And I'm sure that if you send him a LinkedIn invitation, he would gratefully accept your invitation and engage with you. And Claudio, any last words before we sign off?
Well, I definitely want to thank you, Susan, for the invite and for giving me this opportunity to share a little bit more about my story. And I want to invite, those people who might be listening here to take a listen to my podcast, not because it is my project, but really because there's so many valuable pieces of information. I always try to make it semi-obvious what the subject is going to be, so you can just kind of roll through the list of episodes and see what might pique your interest, but also to take a look at that project that we spoke about, the 75 Lawyers, 75 Stories, specifically for those early in their careers. That's the question that I asked, a Supreme Court of Canada justice That's the question that I asked, lawyers who are solo, who are working for not-for-profits, who are working for really big corporations or big law firms. I asked them all the same question. What kind of advice would you give to an early career professional navigating the world right now for the next 75 years? So there's a lot of very, very good pieces of advice. And you can
Fabulous.
find that both at the University of Toronto website. You can just Google 75 lawyers, 75 stories, University of Toronto. You can find it on my LinkedIn profile. So I would definitely encourage you to take a look.
Excellent. Thank you, Claudio, so very much. It was so good to meet you.
Likewise, thank you so much. Take care.